Good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be presenting today on the Family PIO Liaison Program on behalf of Icp Tta. My name is Cassidy Carlson, and I'm currently serving as a division chief for the Aurora, Colorado Police Department. Was previously had a variety of assignments through almost a 20-year career, one of which was serving as the public information officer during the 2012 theater shooting incident that we had in Aurora, Colorado. So first, I'm going to cover what exactly is Icp Tta. So it's an awesome program, no-cost planning and preparedness program to incorporate victim, family, and first responder care into existing mass violence and domestic terrorism and emergency management plans and exercises. Customized training and technical assistance for selected communities is available. The goal is to bridge the gap between victim services and emergency management. The Icp Tta Project Objectives include ensuring families, victims, and first responders care after incidents of criminal mass violence and domestic terrorism. Utilize individualized training and technical assistance, document adaptations to include criminal mass violence annex, incorporate victim service operations into existing exercise structure and calendar, and link exercise objectives with core capabilities. So the guiding principles behind the Icp Tta include the 16 best practices in planning for a criminal mass violence or domestic terrorism incident. And so, as you can see, there's the 16 best practices before you. I won't go through each of those right now, but today we're going to be focusing on number 6, the Public Information and Crisis Communication Protocol. So the goals of the webinar, which I hope to obtain today, are to introduce the program that could be beneficial during an incident of mass violence, provide the background of how the program started, discuss the concept and intention of the program, provide logistical ideas to help implement the program, discuss guidelines, parameters, and other considerations. So before I get into the specifics of the PIO Family Liaison Program, I'm going to give a short background of the actual shooting incident and our response. So the movie that was being released was highly anticipated, and it was going to be released at midnight on July 20th, 2012. And we had the theater was packed with people in anticipation of this movie. We had about 350, 375 people in that auditorium. The movie starts to play at midnight. We get a call of loud music from 1910 Paris Street. Now, this is about 3 miles from the movie theater. So we, of course, don't know what is about to happen. Not an unusual call. So that call gets put into pending for police officers to respond when they can. In fact, it's actually in a different district. So about 30 minutes after that, we get the call, the first call of shots fired from inside the movie theater. Obviously, mass chaos ensues. Now we're getting all kinds of calls, of course. Our officers arrive on scene fairly quickly. We were very fortunate. We had, because of the time and the day of the week, we had specialty units. We had our swing shift officers and our graveyard officers. So we had several police officers that were able to respond. The suspect in this shooting was immediately apprehended in the back of the movie theater, trying to leave. And we quickly learned that this call on Paris Street was associated with him. It is actually his apartment. And what he had done is he had booby-trapped his apartment in anticipation that police officers would arrive prior to the attack to address the loud music, and all the IEDs he had set up would explode, causing a apartment building to crumble. We would have seen many casualties at that point, and that would deter the police officers because they would all be going to this explosion and not the theater. Lucky for us, our officers had not been able to make it to that call yet. And instead, during that 30-minute window, it stayed in as a pending call. So we did not have officers or, thank goodness, neighbors go to the apartment to cause that diversion. Instead, all of our officers are able to respond to the theater and address victims there. We transported many victims via police car. which has become recognized national best practice if ambulances can't get to the scene. And so as this is being dealt with, we learned that the department is associated with him, and how that will play out is, kind of fast forwarding is Friday, we're dealing with, Friday during the day, just dealing with accounting for victims, figuring out, who the deceased are, working through that as you would in any investigation. But we've also at this point have evacuated his apartment building and deemed it secure enough that we are now waiting for some assets from, national partners to help deal with the explosives inside the apartment. And we decide that on Friday, we would address it with the bomb squads on Saturday morning. So our incident continues over several days. It's not just we have the shooting and then it's over. We have the shooting, then we have the threat of the apartment that we're dealing with. And so it's an ongoing, lots of moving parts, ongoing situation for us. Now, getting back to the theater, obviously he goes in, high-powered weapons, and he had thrown some gas that was affecting people as well. But in total, we had 70 injured, 58 that suffered gunshot wounds, and then, as you can see, several other injuries involved. And then, unfortunately, we did have 12 people die in this incident. Our youngest victim was Veronica Mosher Sullivan, and she was 6 years old, attending the movie with her mother. And as you can see, that plaque was to recognize her. She had at one point said to a teacher that she wanted to be a police officer. So the Aurora Police Department honored her as an honorary police officer. But we like to take a moment, hold space for those lives lost at the Aurora Theater shooting. So some of the things that we recognize when victims of mass violence of this sort, what the families have to go through, as they're dealing with their grief and this terrible, terrible tragedy is, the pressure to speak to the media, their loved ones' social media being, exposed, or, pictures gathered from that and being shown prior or without their, consent or without their maybe wanting them to do that. You're always going to have the challenge that the names of the deceased are going to be released by the media prior to the official notifications being made to the family. Now, the notification process, we have to, confirm the identities. That's a process with the medical examiner, coroner's office. And it has to be done right. And sometimes it just takes time. And so while we have victim advocates in place with these families, knowing that that's probably going to be the outcome, again, it just takes a little bit of time. And unfortunately, maybe it's people that they were there with, or, just other people just saying, hey, we believe that our friend or loved one is deceased, and then that starts kind of that ball rolling of these names getting out before really, in our case, law enforcement was prepared and things like that. And then once that happens, the media, the stream of phone calls and emails to these families, to again, the pressure to speak. I mentioned, about photos getting out that may not be the ones that the family wants out, or if they want any at all. So one of the things that I realized was, while I was the professional PIO and dealing with it was an international story at this point. I mean, our phones were blowing up and getting all kinds of calls. And this is, in fact, the photo here that you're seeing, and that's me in the middle of at the suspect's apartment. I'm doing a briefing on the IED situation. And it's during this time that I recognize, wow, I haven't even lost a loved one. I'm the professional PIO dealing with it. I'm completely overwhelmed. I'm drained. I can't imagine also having to deal with the grief and the pain of losing somebody during a tragic event like this. So I just held space for these victims' families and what they might be going through. And that's when it occurred to me, there's probably real opportunity here for us to maybe provide them some help in our realm. And I had a great resource network through the Emergency Services Public Information Officers of Colorado, which is our, it's a networking training group of professional PIOs. And so we had already had this established. My colleagues had been calling and texting me, what can we do? What can we do? How can we help you during this time? And a light bulb came on, and I was like, that's how they're going to help. They are going to be the PIO for the PIO liaison for these families. And so this is kind of where this idea came. And my thought was they would provide the buffer between the grieving families and the media. And it would be solely whatever the family wanted. It would empower the families to navigate their loved ones' stories as they wished. If they didn't want any media, didn't want to talk to them, we could shut that down, let the media know that, provide that buffer. But if they wanted to share, if they wanted to do an interview or whatever that looked like, share a favorite photo, we would help them navigate that and get that out. And then just coordinating interview statements and photo release, as I said. And it was really important to me as I thought about this program and what it would look like, is that these PIOs were not going to be the spokespeople for the families, but rather just that buffer. So as this idea is coming, it's Saturday morning, I discussed the program idea with my chief and the investigations team, and of course our victim advocates. As I said, we already had a victim advocate paired with each of these families. And so I was really just playing off of that and thinking that that would be a good team for those victim advocates and the PIO. I also, because in our case, we had an arrest. And so I needed, of course, check with the district attorney's office to make sure they didn't have any concerns about what this program would look like. Everybody said, yeah, that sounds great. Go with it. So Saturday afternoon, I reached out to the ESPIOC group and asked the president, can you please send something out, see if anybody's willing to come tomorrow morning, Sunday morning, to a meeting and hear this out. And so once you know it, 8 a.m. Sunday morning, I had a room full of people willing to help and hear this idea and see how we can implement it. So during this meeting, we had the victim advocates there. We also had a representative from the DA's office, who obviously was very curious to hear how this was going to play out. And then and people from the investigative team as well. So during this meeting, just discussed, what the purpose and the guidelines were going to be, and how it would roll out, and really just also soliciting some ideas if anybody had any, as this was just getting off the ground. Again, the volunteer PIOs, it was important that they were outside of the lead agency. In this case, it was the Aurora Police Department. And the reason, I was already overwhelmed, me and my partner, fellow PIO, completely overwhelmed. So one of the other benefits of a program like this is that it relieves the lead PIO from handling these requests, because otherwise they'd be coming into the lead PIO, hey, can we get in touch with this family? Would they want to talk? Things like that. And then, you're able to provide the family with someone's undivided attention as it relates to their expertise in, handling the media. The volunteers, another benefit being outside lead agency is these PIO volunteers did not have knowledge of the case. So therefore there wouldn't be, they wouldn't know anything about the case to share with the media. So it's kind of providing a bright line there, not, or at least for me, relief that they wouldn't accidentally say something that they shouldn't, because they don't have knowledge of it. And of course, these people should not be part of any sort of investigative briefing to prevent that from happening. Their role was just to be with the families and to navigate the media as the family wished. So how did we make this happen? So once we met, what I did was I took I identified 12 PIOs that would be paired with the families. And again, in selecting those people, they were people I knew I had worked with. They were, many of them, almost all of them were law enforcement PIOs. They understood, I had dealt with things like, not to this capacity, but, had dealt with families that had lost somebody maybe to a homicide or something. And so once these people were paired together, we decided that the way we would have a consistent contact was we created an email address that we just simply set up through Google with the family name. So for example, it would be smithfamilypio@gmail.com. What this did is it made it easy for us, if that person that we originally selected maybe in 2 weeks or a week later couldn't help us out for whatever reason, we could easily slide somebody else in there. And it was important too that the contact wasn't their work email address or something like that. So this really did provide, again, that great buffer that I was trying to accomplish. And we also did the Google Voice numbers as well, just so there was that separation. This program was all about if the families wanted it or not. So then the next step after, we did the logistics of pairing the PIOs and the victim advocates met, and met each other. And then we had to explain it to the families and kind of what we were trying to do. So that's when the family coordination happened. This occurred Sunday afternoon. The families were all going to be together to meet with the PIOs, and there was a vigil that night. So the families were told about the program by the victim advocates, given a heads up, and the families were told, this is completely up to you. You can either do it or not, but this is just a way that you can have a buffer and have a professional PIO help guide you while your family's grieving. So the folks that said, yes, we would like that, the PIOs were then introduced to those families. And really at that point, I said, all right, you guys run with it. Kind of once that part was done. And the assignments were sent to the PIOs and the victim advocates, and they reached out to one another. The families attended the PIO introduction meeting. And again, the victim advocates helped facilitate those introductions. And then the next step that I did was I sent an email to the media, including which families were participating, and provided those email addresses, which I have that email coming up. But the important things are the guidelines that were provided to the families. Again, completely optional to the family. I was very adamant that the PIO is not the family spokesperson, or not the one writing what they want it to be released. They could provide the guidance and feedback, but they were not to be the spokesperson. Providing the media contact to give families space to grieve. The PIO could assist with any social media that the family was interested in utilizing. And then really the families get to determine how they want to deal with media. And in our situation, it was both that some people were like, absolutely, we don't want anything to do with them. And so those PIOs were, that kind of guardian of that family, if you will, and others wanted to do different things. And so those PIOs were able to guide that. So this is the email I sent to the media folks. And essentially it's just explaining, here's the program. This is what we're trying to do. The families that you see below, they've opted into this program. So we're asking you, and again, this is all we can do is ask the media, that this PIO address should be the first point of contact. And then again, setting those ground rules with the media, avoid asking questions about facts of the criminal case, which, because of how we did it, they wouldn't have known them anyway, but I was eliminating that from happening. And then just kind of saying, we'd anticipate that you will be respectful of families' wishes in regard to media contact. So that was released to the media, and below this was the email addresses of the families that wanted to be utilizing this program. And overall, it was very, very well received. Again, the PIOs helped, were utilizing coordinating interviews. We had some families that wanted to do that, releasing statements and photos. And then another thing that they did, and it was very beneficial, is coordinated any funeral coverage. So if the family wanted some media coverage, the PIO would coordinate, usually, getting on a pool camera type thing, and coordinating that so the family could have it, presented to the media if that's what they wanted. Another thing that I didn't realize was our PIOs were doing, but many of them archived media. So any stories about their loved one or any story that related, the PIOs were archiving that for the families, which I thought, oh, that was what a great idea that was, that those professional PIOs captured that. Another thing that they did, which was really effective, which we started doing as a PIO office after on major events, was using the automatic email update function. So what would happen is we had some PIOs that would do a daily update. In this particular situation was a family that one person was deceased, but they did have another family member who was living, and so the media who'd been severely injured, and so the media was very interested in the updates of the person that had suffered injuries, and so the email address was used. So when they emailed that PIO family PIO group, they would get an automatic bounce back that just said, so today, any update, any change, and that was very effective. So what ended up happening is the media knew that was happening, so they would just send a blank email to that just to get the bounce back. It just became an effective way to communicate. So then it kind of became when to end the program. And, when I thought of it, I didn't really think about that part, but as we moved through, and we just kind of talked as a group about, maybe the appropriate time is at the funeral service. In our case, we then moved to a trial. And so maybe it's something that professional PIO is just touching base throughout that course. And this is going to be a case by case basis. I don't know that there's a clear line of when it should end. Those are just maybe some factors to consider. We also held occasional meetings with this PIO group. We had that initial meeting, and then, I think it was a couple weeks later, just to check in as to how things were going. And then I had correspondence with those folks, checking in at how things were going. They would alert me if they thought I needed to know anything. And again, this was, important as, the selection of the PIOs that I placed with the families. That they knew, when it was important to contact me or not. Otherwise, like I said, once that they were assigned, I just said, okay, run with it. We'll see how it turns out. And then, of course, the decision to close the Gmail or Google Voice accounts, or perhaps you turn it over to the family, whatever seems most appropriate. As with any mass casualty event, mass violence incident, it rocks the community. It rocks the police department, all the responders, all the volunteers that come out. I mean, it greatly impacts you as an individual. And so I just like to highlight and just remind people that it's important. Self-care is very, very important. So whether you're the lead or you're somehow involved, or you get placed as a family PIO, just during these incidents, that self-care is very important, and in order to provide the services to these folks, we need to be taking care of ourselves. So I just always like to take a minute to point that out. The program was a huge success. We got good feedback from the families, very appreciative that was just one thing that they could just turn over and not have to worry about. And the media was very receptive to the program. They actually were thankful, and they just said that it was good for them to know a professional PIO was on the other end of that phone line, or that email address, because that's who they're, used to dealing with, and that they felt better than, having to reach directly to the grieving parent or the person who had just lost a loved one. So they were very receptive to it. And again, it alleviated the lead agency from calls about the victims. It allowed me to take a little bit off of our plate. So now that you've kind of learned a little bit about how we did it in Aurora, here's some ways that you can get organized and things to think about now. One of the biggest tenets of ICP at TTA is, being organized, getting prepared now, getting all your ducks in a row. So, God forbid your community has to go through a mass violence incident, that you at least have thought about it. You've done some planning so that you're prepared to handle it. So some of the things that you can do: identify staff and organizations. Hopefully you have a regional group or a state group like we do here in Colorado that you could immediately call on to step up. And think about this in different arenas as well, whether it be, the victim advocate piece, the PIO piece, depending on what your field is. Determining the triggering mechanisms and processes, thinking about that, and then sharing those ideas with stakeholders now. So talking to your chief or talking to your sheriff, hey, if we have an event here, this is a program that has been proven, kind of getting the blessing beforehand instead of during the chaotic event. Define the program parameters and possibly an SOP for your operating group, whether you have an organized networking group, and just defining those parameters and what that's going to look like for your community. And then I'm a huge advocate of conducting training and exercises. I always say, being a police officer, we do a great job as tactical training and tactical responses. And sometimes the other things we maybe don't do such a good job on, as far as, how our victim advocate is going to be involved, how our PIO is going to be involved, kind of those ancillary things that are, very, very, very important during these incidents. So I always encourage, if your SWAT team is doing a mass shooting exercise, as a training, and your role at your agency is your PIO, or your role is the victim advocate, get involved, be there, see those things. And even if you're just there observing and thinking of like, okay, this is what I'm going to do next, and you're talking to your team about, this is what we have to think about now. How are we going to handle these questions? How are we going to disseminate information? That is a great way. Again, most of the time those tactical trainings are happening, and so just get involved. Is your role as whatever that looks like, and how are you going to respond? Technology is changing all the time. Stay on top of technology and what tools are out there that can help you day to day, and get familiar with those technology tools, and then know how to use them, how you're going to use them in a mass casualty incident. And then if it's appropriate, you might want to develop MOUs with other agencies or groups that you might be working with, so that these are things you're not having to deal with when the crisis hits. This is one of our favorite photos. It's all over our police departments and many cubicles across the agency. And this was a representative. This was actually a cartoonist, I think, in Pittsburgh, and he sent this to our agency a day or two following. And it was just showing, the tremendous work of those first responders, getting victims out, transporting them in the police cars, as I said before. So I just like to share that. It's just a cool representation of the heroism that happened that night. Well, I threw a lot at you. Hopefully you find, some of the stuff I said helpful, but with anything, and there's a ton of resources available through ICP Tta. So I encourage you to get involved. The application, if you use that QR code, can get you in touch, and so that we can provide individualized training and technical assistance for your community. So scan that QR code, check out the website, If you have any further questions or any other follow-up for me, feel free to email that address and I'll get it and can help you out. So I appreciate your time today, and stay safe.